Hey everyone, my name's Larry Perra. First, I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. Thanks so much for joining. Today is the first of a three-part series where I have the privilege of speaking with writers and artists who are challenging and changing the discourse around race and sexuality and gender, a discourse that's often polarized and dismissive and just kind of weird. Today, I am so happy to welcome a truly modern Renaissance man, an actor, a musician, an advocate, an activist, a producer, a director, and a poet, Avan Jogia. Welcome, Avan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Larry. This is
That's all.
That's quite a nice intro, I have to say.
It's all very true. It's all like I've followed you, not in a creepy way, your career, and I just have such admiration for what you've done, the varied projects you've done, and it's all within, you choose what you're doing.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me to do this. This is really exciting.
Yes, it is. And today we are looking at the book of poems and stories, Mixed Feelings.
There it is. You have your
Yes,
copy. I have my copy. I had to go to my dad's place, who, of course, you know very well, to pick up a copy because I didn't have one on me. And so I popped over to grab a copy from him.
I've been using this, obviously, you can tell with all these things. I've been teaching poems from this collection for a couple of years now in my English Lit class, which has been really awesome.
It's so sweet of you. I mean, it's amazing to be that educational tool, you know.
It really is, and I just, in fact, this week it was so serendipitous. We discussed Flower Boys and Girl Boy, as well as Colored Child. So there's a few questions I'll ask later about what students are interested in, but they've connected so wholly with the subject matter in terms of gender as well as just the sort of space in between. What you're talking about, the mixed feelings.
Yeah.
I know it's a bit of a cliche, a question. You might be sick of it, but what inspired you to begin this process?
Well, I think it started initially as an investigation of self. As you mentioned, I've been an actor for a while, about 12, 13 years now. And, sort of navigating the world of the film industry that really does ask you to put a microscope on yourself as to who you are as a person and how you are represented, how people observe you, and how you observe yourself. I mean, it's really the most sort of like, it's one of those jobs that like asks you to know thyself quite well and also know how people observe you. So I'd really gone the first couple of years of my career, at least the first decade of my career, not really acknowledging or not really thinking about it too much, just letting the industry sort of dictate to me how it observed me rather than sort of searching within myself to sort of dictate to myself how I observe myself. So it started as an exploration. I've been writing poetry since I was, 13. A lot of it very bad. A lot of it like, I had this sort of love for like John Wilcott and sort of poets of the Romantics and Lord Byron and all that stuff. And so I was writing poems about absinthe and syphilis and stuff. I mean, not stuff that really like any 13-year-old really knows anything about. But you start. Yeah, hopefully you start by imagining and you start by like it's fantasy. It's another way for me to sort of story tell and all that sort of thing. So I've been playing around with poetry for a long time, and then then I found myself sort of focusing on the concept of race a little bit further as I explored as actually the rise of sort of Black female voices in America had sort of begun to have these sort of larger racial discussions, or Blackness in general in America had begun to sort of take to demand more of the attention deserved, and to acknowledge the power within its own identity, especially from a poet's sort of standpoint, but from an artistic standpoint and from a cultural standpoint in general. And so you start to think about, okay, so where do I fit into that sort of grand scheme of racial identity? And I realized that as I started exploring this concept and talking to other mixed kids, that we've always felt sort of outside of all identity politics, race politics, because again, there's no bandwagon that mixed people can sort of throw themselves behind, because it always feels like you're too much of this and not enough of that. I think that's the basis sort of really of the mixed experience. But then you start being like, okay, so is there a mixed culture? And yes, culture is shared experiences. So if all of us, whether whatever you're mixed with, whether you're Ecuadorian, Icelandic, or whatever it is, all of mixed people share a common cultural experience, which makes us our own culture. And so as soon as I discovered that, I felt very not as alone culturally as I did previous to that moment. And then I started to do interviews and explore that concept with with a wider audience through poetry.
That's quite the journey, right? I know in some of your poetry you talk about this sort of polarization of being this or this. Certainly when you're being cast, I imagine, right?
Sure,
you've mentioned that.
I think that's where I first started to observe those differences in a subtle way, and sort of be sort of confused by the other people's interpretation of me versus the interpretation I had of myself.
That's right. So when you say that people of mixed race or backgrounds have a shared identity, what do you mean by that? What is that shared experience?
I think the shared experience, the shared experience is the shared experience of not being too much of this and not enough of this. The concept of the feeling of being split down the middle, the feeling of being reduced to whatever people see visually about your race, being slotted and allotted into different groups as a level of convenience for most people in society, or at least being allocated a race that diminishes the largeness of your actual racial background. And that what I realized, the more you zoom out on that concept, the more that it includes everyone, because I started to really fundamentally realize that we all have and I think I talk about it in the book, is our bag of motivations, and that we pull from this bag all the time. And it's sometimes, and right now we're centered around sexual orientation, gender, and race, but there's socioeconomic background, there's religious background, there's if I grew up watching English television, how culturally has that changed me? And is that a significant part of my cultural identity? Does it define you in a weird way? There's these subtle versions of that all the time, but we are obviously, as a society, really focused on the big ticket items of race, gender identity, and sexual identity.
So why do you think it is that these sort of binaries are perpetuated and kind of encouraged? You identify either with this or this. You either are gay or straight. You're either South Asian, male, or
female.
Black. Yeah. Who benefits from that?
I think, who benefits from that? I don't think we do as individuals. I don't think individuals benefit from it. I can say with assurance. I think that, and you see it even in liberal settings. This desire to define things. It's a weird human instinct. I want to believe that it's some sort of Passover of survival instinct. That is a tiger. To be able to define.
That's what I think. Yeah. Exactly. It's instinctual.
It's instinctual, and I like to believe that okay, so instinct and id and all that stuff is super. It's real, it's something that we have to acknowledge. But we're upright, hairless apes. We've evolved for millennia, and why we would cease to evolve in this particular arena. That instinct to categorize needs to be fought all the time.
Exactly.
And I think it's on both. I mean, it's not a political thing. It's just like in general, the idea that this is eradication of nuance in the world.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to put it. The eradication of nuance.
Yeah. To help us easily define, those people are my enemy, or those people I don't agree with their politics, I don't agree with their gender identity, or the way that they, like it's just a way of it's tribal.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I agree. I sometimes talk about how, I agree, the reptilian brain, right? That if we see a tiger, run. That good. Yeah. You better know that. Yeah, but I think it's often down to the intent, I think, sometimes that people have. And I wanted to talk about labels with you and the labels that are put onto people. Mixed race. I'm not sure, like, what does that help? Does that, does it define it?
It doesn't. It's sort of a vague thing. Actually, I just want to circle back to your question. The last question asked who benefits from those labels. And I think that there are, we all have this tribalistic sort of mindset naturally in our reptilian brain. There are people who are very comfortable exploiting that natural instinct and tendency in us naturally in order to pit us against each other for their benefit, for the distraction of conflict. So that would be the thing that I think that they benefit, the people, there's people who benefit from it. Just to sort of finish that up, because it just sort of came to me. It's like, they want to distract us with this level of conflict. I think there's a, not to be like, this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but there is an inclination that the less we expand, the better as people,
I think,
but as far as
Sorry, I agree with that. I think that that's part of the motivation, and it kind of sucks that we're so easily distracted. Oh, look, a butterfly, rather than just kind of focus. It's hard work.
Yeah.
So sorry,
it is hard work, and there has to be, I think, a spiritual. That's why I sort of go back to there has to be a spiritual desire to conquer these things. I don't mean I don't necessarily mean a religious experience, but there has to be some form of in order to us to not get distracted, there has to be a central change in we have the technology of gods and the spiritual development of toddlers. We have no interest in expanding thought. It's we got to, there were some people, holy men, who were expanding thought or whatever, and then we just drop it. I got an iPhone. We're good.
Yeah. Well, those are two things I wanted to talk to you about, because in your poetry, you really reference just the sort of bigger idea. It's not the sort of monotheistic God. It's the universe, especially in a few of them, but in Where Are You From? I love that idea. First of all, we are you don't say we are stardust, but it's that idea that we all came from the same thing. I think that's something that spirituality really does, can provide for people. And it's instinctual for you. It doesn't have to be defined by a specific, again, label of religion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I would even go to say it's instinctual in all of us. There's a reason why asking the questions of existence have been such a at the forefront of art, science, basically all of our human desires throughout history. I mean, if you're if you have any interest in history, you can see the repeating patterns of people desperately trying to define the cosmos, to define what it, what existence is. And I think that's innate in all of us. It's going to be innate in my children or the children of tomorrow or whatever. It doesn't matter. As the environment changes, our questions are still the same. What happens when we die? What's the point of living? All the stuff that that we.
How come we haven't found the answer yet?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, this is part of the curiosity, I think, that we all
share.
That sort of motivates us as well.
And causes fear too. I mean, that causes fear responses.
Yeah.
I'm scared, so I need to define it.
That's right. Exactly. Well, it's a way to package it up again, right? To be able to contain the fear so that we don't have to deal with the bigger sort of emotions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I just want to show this again. For people, it's all very low tech, but for people who haven't opened this book or haven't gotten it yet, what I really love is just the variety of you have drawings, which you did as well, right?
Yeah, I did paintings and the drawings.
Stop! You've done enough.
I had a sort of a manic little month of like my entire kitchen was like all these little paintings that me and my partner had to like walk around as we sort of did things, Yeah. So, but it was fun. It was good.
I bet. I mean, first of all, you can look at this book primarily as a family history,
and that was something that was not intended when I first started. At first it was supposed to be when I first started reading the book. It was sort of like not a cold. I found it to be cold. It was an outside-in sort of exploration of race. I wanted to interview other people. I wanted to all this stuff, and I was like, well, if I'm going to ask so much of other people to expose their family histories and stuff, and then not do any of my own, I felt like it should be. It's sort of like it was maybe lecherous, or it was at the worst lecherous, at the best dishonest. And so I felt like, okay, so I mean, and there's some real choice family experiences in here that are have been mostly private experiences that most people don't. I don't tell people that I know very well, let alone public consumption. So it ended up expanding into an exploration of myself and becoming deeply personal. There's family photos that my high-res scan, going to my grandma's, my Ba's house, and grabbing all the photos and high-res scanning them and putting them in the book, and then painting on them, and sort of just building it ended up just evolving into a love letter of my family in a way.
That's very obvious, for sure. How did they respond to the personal stories? I mean, none of it, to me, there was nothing that I mean, I know your dad, which I know, and he's become a really good friend. But how did they feel about you telling their stories as well?
I think there's always a reticence when you're giving up your story to someone else's artistic license, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the reticence, but I think it's on the job of the artist and the communicator to communicate throughout the process. Okay, this is what I'm going to do, and there'll be resistance, and then it'll get a little less, and then they'll see the work, and they'll be like, "Wow, that's really a beautiful. I can't believe somebody saw it that way," or it allows for a different perspective. I want to believe that it hopefully opened up. It gave a new vantage point to my parents' experience, being a mixed interracial couple, and another way of looking at it from sort of almost an outside perspective, as their child, not being there for the beginning of the relationship and sort of the harder experiences. I was born out of the love. I just saw all the great stuff. You know what I mean?
That's right. And it's really, really clear that this is coming from a place of love. It's coming from a place of respect, especially, when you talk about, because there were two, I don't know if cultural is the right word, but backgrounds, your mom and the English background, and then your dad and the South Asian, but also they were the first generation in London too, right?
Yeah.
And so
they're career immigrants. My family, they were immigrants in Africa, and then they were immigrants in England, and then they were immigrants in Canada. Talk about genetic. We were talking about genetic and human experiences, and how over generations we have these similar questions. My family has always been go to the new place, adapt, go to the new place, adapt, go to the new place, adapt. And it builds a certain type of person. And you can really see that as you start like looking back, like, oh, I see, like they went there and they tried really hard. And you can understand how it motivates culture and motivates, experience, this constant moving.
Because obviously you've done this with your own career, right? With
I
going
went
into
to
different.
LA.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to LA. Yeah.
By the way, I got to see you in LA for that. I think that was the first stop on your book tour, right?
Yes, it was.
It was so
Yes, it
serendipitous. I wasn't stalking you, I promise. But
yeah, you just happened to be there. It was so good. It was so good.
Yeah.
I'm so happy.
I was there for a fundraiser for a kids camp where Neil Young was performing.
Oh, cool.
So it was just like, and a small, like maybe 2,000.
And my dad, it's not just me. It was my dad happened to be there as well.
Yes.
Like it was like the only show that my dad saw was the LA show.
Is that right? Yeah. It was so
great. My mom saw the New York show.
Yeah. I heard she cried a bit in that one.
I cried a little bit. What happened was she was in the front, and that was a mistake because I got to a point where it's a very sort of emotional sort of poem song that I sing about my parents, and I got to the part about my mother, and we saw each other, and I had to restart. I had to restart the song.
Do you want to do a redo now? I'd love to hear that poem actually, if you feel like reading something. I really.
That poem is actually not in the book. That is only in the album that I got ambitious because I can't leave well enough alone. I wrote the book, and then me and my brother, we were like, what if, like, I think that it's such a spoken thing that like not having an audio sort of companion to it is sort of we could definitely do that. And so we made this record, which is half song, half spoken word. Which is
that's Saint Ivory, right? Is that?
Saint Ivory. That's our project together that we work and do all that
really
stuff.
Awesome.
But if you'd like me to read from the book, I can absolutely do that.
I would love it. Yes.
Okay. I think, let's see what I got here. I'll start with Flower Boy, and then maybe I'll move on and do another one. Let's see where Flower Boy's at. It's like you have your tabs, so you're already ahead.
I just taught Flower Boys this week, so I have some feedback for you. Nothing but awesome.
But, that's amazing. Okay, so I will give you a reading of Flower Boy. This is a picture of me, and this is a picture of me and my brother.
Yes.
Who's in St. Ivory, and that's us in a flower field.
Where is that, by the way?
Oh, that's outside. I want to say it's like on the way to Seattle from.
Yes.
Maybe it's Abbotsford. Maybe it's in Abbotsford. It's a big tulip. It's just outside of Vancouver. It's this massive tulip. That's right. You go in the spring, and it's really beautiful.
It's magic.
Okay, let's do a little reading here. Me and my brother were raised to be flower boys, softly swaying in the wind, taught that men practice kindness, taught that showing love was the most powerful thing we could do. Our father was a flower too. He grew us up in his garden. Maybe one day there will be fields and fields of flower boys softly swaying in the wind. I think the world would be kinder then. You can be a flower too. Short little poem.
I love that. Before you read on, I just want to talk about how, first of all, it's. Sorry, I don't mean to be like, tell me what you think about your own poem, but I kind of do want to know. I'll tell you what the students talked about and what they connected with.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah.
It's about what we talked about at the beginning. This binary: either you're a boy or you're a girl. Either you like flowers, which makes you feminine, or you like trucks or whatever. One of the things that really struck people, just let me get my glasses on, were two things. The kindness, the reference to kindness. And we often think that kindness is aligned only with the feminine.
Right.
Was that something that sort of that you agree with or that you thought about when you were writing this? Was it something that was just instinctual, similar to
I
the
think,
reptilian brain, but a better version?
yeah. I think, I think that and my father,
Mm-hmm.
so this will be relevant. I had such a specific um, idol as a male idol, as the first man that you really meet in your life, the first man you meet in your life, which is your father, who practices kindness, who practices empathy unconsciously.
Yes.
It's not it's just the way that he operates. And the and then being expanding my idea of masculinity and seeing all these different versions of it, I actually started to realize how rare a commodity that level of kindness is, or at least how it's. I don't think it's rare within men, but I think that a lot of the time it is. There is a erosion of kindness as you're asked to be all the other things that society asks of our men.
Yes.
We ask all these sort of like questions about: are you ambitious? Do you get what you want and take what you need, or all that which now, I mean, as we progress in modernity, has become we see it as sort of toxic traits, or at least traits that when unbridled can be very toxic. When
Yeah.
completely unleashed, it can be very toxic. So I guess that the idea of kindness and masculinity has always been a natural assumption or connect as being the first man that I met, being my father, and him being as kind as he is. But it also is a obvious promotion of 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 that as a scope of masculinity, and that is an aspect of masculinity that gets disregarded, and that we can that we would probably do better as a society if we were to expand that trait, or give that trait as much respect as we give ambition, decisiveness, and all the other things that all the other traits that we hang on the shoulders of men.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, it's this back to this weirdness of how sometimes society just insists on something being one, like choose a side. Kindness is
Yeah.
feminine. Kindness is,
Yes.
so it's one of those qualities that just is inherent to all of us. But it,
Yeah.
it does get sort of it's lowered on the hierarchy because of that. And then the
What's
last
seen as
thing,
weakness, it's seen as weakness,
yes.
and at the end of the day, it's like when a society where we decide that 49% of our population has been asked to reduce a very normal human quality to third, fourth tier quality.
Yeah, yeah,
You see the result of it everywhere you look.
yeah.
You see the result of not prioritizing kindness in almost every aspect of our society.
I agree. I think that there's something. It's that it's the easiest thing in terms of interacting with people. Just be kind, man. Like it's not that hard to do. I have a
Yeah.
friend who years ago, she was the first one who made me think about that, because she would never date any guy who was unkind. That would be, that wouldn't happen. And it just started made me think, it's simple. Just be kind. It's sorry, I sound like Ellen DeGeneres, but
No,
that's the
I know.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
it is. It's
She
true. It's
she
true.
has she's onto something there.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
the last thing about this poem that I thought was really interesting, the response was your dad, and just what students really lingered on was how it is, as you say, like your dad was the model, right? Of what I'm sorry to be so, this or that, but what a man was, right?
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
you got,
No, I mean, it's important that we recognize that there are these inherent sociological concepts of
mhm,
man and woman. It's sort of like, it's not real. Like, race isn't real. But if you go around the world saying race isn't real, you ignore large swathes of the way that people experience the world around them. Because race isn't real. It's it really, at the end of the day, the human race is the singular thing.
Exactly.
One species. But if you erase that definition, you're now not observing how you're erasing people's experience, just like they're with male and female. I don't personally believe that we live in this binary, but we have to accept that most of society has up to a certain point.
Yeah, I agree. This metaphor of the melting pot, I always found that just so gross. Like everything's that sort of beige, sticky. Ugh. You don't taste the carrots or whatever.
Yeah.
So I always thought that was a terrible metaphor.
It's a zesty stew with all these lovely things in it. Good carrots, a great, a good chicken stock. Maybe something. That's what it should be. All working together.
Exactly. And yeah, I was looking for something like a food. I'm not a foodie, but for some food metaphor, I might take that from you if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I have just a couple more. You have such a close relationship with Ketan, your brother, with your dad and your mom. You write a few poems about your mom, but also the matriarchal influence in your family. I'm a self-proclaimed mama's boy. I love my mom more than anyone. But how has that sort of played out with your career or your philosophy or the creations that you make?
I think that having I really do feel like I've lucked out as far as having my first with a person, a woman being my mother. I feel very lucky to have had the parents that I had and the experience and how it's expanded my thought or expanded the way that I synthesize the world around me. I think that having the dynamic that I have with my parents has teed me up to sort of experience the world in a very specific, in my specific way, which has also lined up with sort of modern ideas of what gender could be. You know what I mean? And there's an even further expanse upon that. And as we grow up, we learn that there's this dynamic and that you can expand those borders even further. But I mean, it's having as my first initial experience with a mother and a father and with these gender roles. They were already expansive and so advanced that I was able to sort of the concepts being thrown around as we sort of like grew our social thought weren't completely lost on me. In fact, a lot of the time I was like, well, yeah. and you know what I mean, and sort of wanting to expand upon it further. I think that it's this ever growing thing that we're learning more and more about as far as like how we experience or express these different various parts of ourselves.
I'd love it actually if you read another poem of your choice. I do want to talk just back to, sorry, I'm going to back up. When you talked about you were sort of born into this open-mindedness, into this sort of fluidity with the family, with your dad and mom, with race, obviously, with just gender fluidity, you know what I mean? So I'm trying to think of how to say this. I think we're in a really interesting transition now where it's come to the forefront in a way where I mean, I'd be such a different person if the ideology of now, just this, this transition where young boys are wearing dresses to the playground and no one's commenting on it. Or if someone does comment on it, they're the weird one.
They're the weird ones. Yeah, they're being socially ostracized. And we're using social we're using our highest commodity as we do at our tribalistic sort of brain, which is social ostracization of people who do that sort of involve themselves in that sort of behavior. I think more and more there is obviously the inverse of that in some places in the world, but at least where we are living, where the experience that we're having.
I think that's absolutely right too. The sort of environmental aspect of this as well.
But it's contagious. One has to believe it's contagious.
Well, you know, collective consciousness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a thing. Zeitgeist. If that sounds a little, it's not conspiracy theory, though. I don't think.
Yeah, exactly.
So, do you feel like reading another poem?
Yeah, I think I'm going to actually since we're speaking so much about gender, I think I actually am going to read Girl Boy, because I love that poem, and
Me too.
I think that's a fun one. Look, here comes the smiling boy girl, brutal and boylike, with bright girlish eyes and hair that spills down his back. He was in love with the world, and when he'd go play, some parents would say, "Look at that badly behaved little girl." And his mom would reply, "Actually, that's our little guy." And the parents would smile, and smugly they'd sigh, "Then that's fine. Look, here comes the sobbing girl boy, casting his pearls before swine."
I love that one too. Of course, there's the sort of religious aspect of long hair. You talk about the first time it's an initiation, right? Sorry, my ignorance.
Yeah. No. It's at 5, there's this concept genderless before your Bambavara, and then you have this. You shape your for men, you shape your head, and women they don't. But again, it's this sort of. I mean, I'm less concerned about the allocation of gender once the 5-year-old thing happens, or I'm more interested in the concept of like children as genderless is interesting. As we become adults, there's more questions asked. There's more defining asked, and I think it's curious as well.
Yeah, and suppression. That was one thing that I think was really that really resonated was in the poem. The smiling, just boy loves the world.
Yeah.
And then after,
and sort of unabandoned, like an abandonment of joy and not thinking about how you're being perceived or observed.
Exactly. So, and then the sobbing in the end is heartbreaking. Do you think that there's some theories where we are not born racist, we're not born with hate, that we learn those things? Do you think that's the way it works?
I think that hate is a social construct. I mean, I think that you hate people who wrong you, but the idea of collective hate on sight based on nothing is based on constructs and ideas. I think that is a developed thing. I think that if hate is not a developed thing, we have that. If you come over to a child and take their toy and they were enjoying, you're gonna get a hateful look out of that kid. So that's natural to us. But I think the idea of a learned apprehension, or a learned, at its worst, a hate of another group that you most of the time have never even had an interaction with. I think that's a learned thing. It's not possible.
Yeah. I hope you're right.
Yeah,
I love that idea.
Functionality point. It's it's just not possible. Like you could be curious and ask ignorant questions. Like that's possible, but I don't think holding hate in your heart based on having never actually interacted with somebody of the person that you hold hate in your heart for, that just can't. It doesn't logically. It falls no logic.
Exactly. I mean, just fundamentally, it's illogical, right?
Yeah. How can you hate something you've never interacted with? Oh, the only way you could do that is if, for some reason, before you interacted with that person, you were fed a bunch of dogma and bullshit that you were supposed to believe about that group of people.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, I grew up in Saskatchewan. I love that province. I'm proud of many parts of it, but that was, pretty.
There's aspects to that. Yeah. There's aspects to that. I mean, in all communities, all tribal communities.
Yeah.
And sometimes the tribe in like, I think about Vancouver, I think about other places in the world that have a larger, diverser demographic of all people from racial backgrounds, gender orientations, gender identities. That's the tribe in itself as well. The expanding of that tribe.
Yeah, well, and again, this is where you come from, and you've integrated just your vast experience, like not only all the professional things you've done, but the things you pursued in terms of creativity. You found a way to pull that all together. I don't want to be all self-conscious about it, but I just, from someone looking in on that's where the world should go, I think.
Oh, man, it's very sweet. Yeah, I was able to. I mean, this book, I've been able to do a lot of cool, interesting things in my life. This may be the book this is the thing I'm maybe the proudest of, as far from an artistic standpoint, that speaks the most to my values and what I and the kind of art that I want to put into the world.
And you were very generous inviting other people to collaborate with as well. I mean, that's not something that everyone would do necessarily, but what sort of informed your choice to do that?
I think having an incomplete idea myself about what mixed identity is. I think I had my hypothesis, and I'm a man, sort of a man of science, and a man of like, I don't like to I like to try and think about how something works on a larger scale than just like, oh, this is how I feel. So it's actually start from a sociological standpoint of just gathering the idea of the mixed experience, and if there is one, I also left the idea that I might get to the end of writing this book and not really have an answer. I left it open ended. I wasn't coming in with a plan as to like this is the outcome I'm trying to achieve by doing all these interviews. I was just like, let's listen, let's talk to people and see if there is any commonality, and I just found there to be so much commonality, so I wanted to collaborate with them. I wanted to bring them in. I wanted to bring those stories in because, again, the mixed experience. I can only speak from my side of my South Asian English experience, but and I have a family that works and perfectly, and my family dynamic is specific, and other people's family dynamics aren't. And hearing people were like the relationship of their parents didn't work because of those perceived cultural differences, and like listening to how their experience was. Like I was seen as I was seen as white to the brown kids and brown to the white kids. And that is a general consensus, I think, from most mixed people. But then I heard from people who are white, very white passing, who experienced life almost entirely as a white person, and whatever that means, and has whatever that, and has a completely different experience than me. Or I've had people who are mixed and can't convince anyone that they're mixed because the world sees them in such a way and has already categorized them and what have you. So I find so it was an exploration, a desperate want and desire to include all stories and all different types of the mixed experience.
Yeah, because like you said, there's both a consistent relationship with being, again, I'm French Canadian, so I'm speaking a bit out of my but that there's a commonality, but then there's also the separation as well, this sense of identity, and that's something you're exploring in the book as well, right? And I've read, as I'm creeping on your social media, no, I'm not, but I've just read a couple things you said about that, and the idea of, the finding one's own identity sort of overrides, it doesn't dismiss the mixed race aspect, but you come to a place
it's just so much more sophisticated than these. Again, these are the big ticket items: racial identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, sexual identity. That's the big stuff that everyone wants to talk about, and everyone's obsessed with. But I think it's quite a diminished person who hangs their entire identity on those three large concepts. This is, I think that the outline of a person, these are the broadest brushstrokes imaginable. There is finer work to be done as far as your identity is concerned that hangs on much more intricate and nuanced concepts than who you want to fuck, how you see yourself visually as a gender orientation, and what your racial background is. Like this is like basic. It's not to me, it's not the whole picture of a person. And I think that society really does like to, these are the three stoppers, and I don't really care about anything else. I got all the information I need.
Yeah. Yeah, if we stop there, for sure. There's a question, like, so do we need, like, in some ways we continue to need the updated version of Stonewall. We need marches where we recognize. I agree. I think that at one point it would be nice not to have to do those. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. I think in the interim, there is, we have to stay on the field of battle with these three marquee points. But I think that is an impoverished image of a person's identity. A person's identity is much more sophisticated than these three stopping points. But we are fighting for, I mean, there's so much work to be done in allowing just allowing these three points to be a diverse field. I mean, we are so at the very beginning, nascent stages of getting, like if we're talking about that, like, like a sort of science fiction-y, sort of futuristic democracy that we all sort of idealize and also doesn't even exist or what have you. This is the beginning stages. If aliens arrived and they found out we were still working out this stuff, they'd turn their ship away. Like, wait, they're still talking about race? Oh, they're not even close.
Maybe they would just kill the ones who are being hateful.
Yeah, they're like, look, let me speed this up. No, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it to me, it's like we have to remain on the field of battle with these 3 points. But the goal is, I think the goal is that these do not end up being the defining features of a human's experience on Earth.
Yeah, without turning it into a melting pot.
That's the group, like everyone's the same sort of thing, and that's not true. It's just that, like, I think what I enjoy and what moves me and what I'm passionate about and what I want to read about and that is way more interesting to me than my racial identity or my, who I'm sleeping with, or if I feel like I express myself a little bit more this way today than another way gender wise, like, that it shouldn't be, it's the expansion of those ideas that I think that we're reaching for. It's sort of this elusive brass ring, but I think keeping in mind that, like, this is the nascent stages of the conversation, that in 100 years, 120 years, we can imagine a world where we're talking about way more sophisticated things. That would be awesome.
That's a really interesting way to put it as well. Like, you're not defined by your racial background. You're not defined by your sexuality, but it's part of you. But that's not the first thing. It's not the first thing people. First of all, hopefully they don't treat you in that way.
Let's start there. Let's start there. Let's get people to not treat us crazy. But then the second thing is, like, identity politics in the world right now is based entirely upon that. Like, people people run for office and political representation is so important, but you're like, just because somebody racially looks like me, does that mean that they're going to support how I feel we should be dealing with climate change?
That's the
how
sort
we
of
should be dealing with all the other stuff, like all the other complicated issues today, how they're dealing with COVID. This sort of assumption that they get it because it's the identity politics thing that I think that, like, is that we need to advance beyond. You know what I mean?
I agree.
And we have to fight for the diversity in the field, that we don't give up that fight. But that's not the end goal for me personally.
Yeah.
For me personally, the end goal is that I want to be able to support a political figure that I believe has the betterment of humanity involved, and not just be like voting for somebody because I think it should be the thing and it's an expanding of the thing, and we're like knocking off points. Like, we did the thing. Look at us. We had a thing. I think that we're done. You know what I mean? Like, I think we need to expect. Hopefully, the goal is that we get to a point where we can look at these ideas and look at what these three marquee things are, and be like, just accept them.
Yeah.
Be happy to have somebody represent. We have enough representation that it's not an article being written about it.
Yes, that's right.
I want you to write an article about this person's energy plan.
Yeah, yeah.
Not
But
the first salvation person in this office, or the first. Because we need to get like 5 deep in that capacity.
Yeah.
That's just be like, what's this person's energy plan? How are they going to stop COVID?
Next 5. Okay, we're at number 3.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
I think it's. I think it's important we acknowledge, first of all, the first South Asian Black vice president, woman.
Amazing.
Of course.
Amazing.
I cried actually when I saw. Watch the
it's completely moving. It's completely moving when you see the history of it, and the history of the office of the vice president, the meeting of the moment. On Capitol just a week ago, there was insurrection from white nationalists. Like, that moment is a beautiful moment. We need to get 3 more deep through that moment, so we could start being like, how's this person's energy bill?
Yeah.
How do they feel about this? What are they? What's their
so
plan for taxing the rich or whatever?
Is it your grandkids you have that hope for?
Yeah, let's hope.
Let's hope.
Hopefully it's my kids.
No, it's you. It's you. I have one last thing to ask. Oops.
Sure.
Sorry, my earpiece. Although I could talk for another hour or two. Speaking of solutions, this world that I'm in, the world of the college academia world, that with this whole weird Zoom shit that's going on, there's a whole thing we have to adjust to. Where do you see the world of the academics fit within your hope or vision of the world? What role do we have as instructors or people going to school?
I think that, I would love the world of academia to return to, arrive at, because then I don't know if it's ever even really been there, as these places where we can dream about tomorrow and dream up tomorrow's solutions, rather than a place where we're galvanizing and indoctrinating people's thoughts. I feel like and it's a very thin line, of people getting all together and conceiving of what tomorrow might bring, and initiates into a way of thinking. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I think that I hope that I have always had a real deep curiosity about academia, maybe because it passed me by as I started working so young. But I do believe that these places can be places for young people to develop new thought and hopefully dream up tomorrow's solutions to tomorrow's problems. Dream up the idea of how we, like I said, expand upon and reach and imagine and reach further than the presented goals of the day. There are presented goals of the day. Carbon neutrality. That would be lovely. That's great. But there's dreaming up the way of getting there, dreaming up what even that world would look like. That to me is like, I think what schools and places of academia have always been exciting when I imagine what they would have been like even though
they're not
probably were
always
never
like that.
Yeah,
Sometimes they
are. Sometimes they are. But I have rose tinted glasses about this thing because I never actually had to go there and do the grind.
Well,
Yeah.
come and take my class next term and see if you feel the same way.
Yeah. It's interesting, but I think as far as like the role of academia and the role of educators, I think educators are the single most undervalued group in modern society, and maybe throughout all of society, is the people who instill the next generation with the tools and capabilities of critical thought, so that they can meet the day in which they arrive at. With a little bit more understanding and hopefully a little bit more grace. And
yeah, that's a good word for it.
Yeah. And I know that you do that, and I know educators like you do that, and I think we're blessed and lucky to. I don't use the word blessed, but look at me, I'm using the word blessed. Lucky to have people who care so much about expanding those ideas.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in the perfect scenario, I agree. That's what the institution should be. So, Avan, you're off to direct a movie that you've written.
Yeah,
that's exciting.
Yeah, I tried the book 2 years ago, and now I'm trying the directing thing. I'm just, I hopefully, I'm just always have the ability to expand and try new artistic avenues. And this will be a movie. It's a movie called Dormouse that I'm directing, that I wrote. I wrote multiple years ago. Maybe like wrote 6 years ago. And now it's relevance. It's finally found its relevance, and therefore found financing and found a place to sort of be. But yeah, it'll be cool. It'll be a new experience for me, and a new adventure, and probably fall on my face a couple times. And
well, it'd be weird if you wouldn't, right?
Yeah, you know what I mean. That'd be weird. So that's my new adventure, my latest. Adventure.
Very exciting, and it's again the creeping on social media. I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, I think that's
no, looking at, not creeping.
Yeah, anyway. observing,
yes,
and taking in.
There's a punk vibe to it, in the sort of
Very
I love
much
it.
So it's sort of it's a punk rock sort of fever dream about classism, elitism, and how people in power use their power influence to sort of keep down and oppress certain other classes within our stratified society. And that's sort of like the thematic version of it. But it's just like a really loud little punk rock song about apathy versus justice.
Oh, that sounds awesome! And again, what a great time for that to be created.
Yeah, it's interesting to come to the end, the beginning of the end of the beginning, and the starting of the directing. Because the long process of pre-production and all this stuff and getting everything ready, I've just arrived at the end of the beginning, and now I get to start the middle. And I'm
okay, good. Which is why, again, I have to thank you so much for making the time to, stop by into this weird virtual world.
Yeah,
but it's so great to hear what you think about the world. It's awesome. So thank you so much, Avan. This has been a real joy.
Thank you, Larry, giving me a space to, spout off and talk about my thoughts and stuff.
Anytime.
It's a lovely conversation.
Anytime. Okay, good luck with the movie. Talk soon.
Thank you, Larry.